voice today, getting over a cold, and I'm hoping not to give it to Kathleen, but I might. We'll see. Basically I represent the city of Eau Claire. I don't have any areas outside of the city. Down in Madison, I'm the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. I'm the ranking Democrat on Transportation Committee, and I'm on the Building Commission, actually with Governor Walker, which is quite an exciting event. And basically, Peter Bartlett kind of puts me where there's trouble coming. And early this session, he called me and he said, "What do you know about highways?" And it was actually 2 days after the election. And I said, "Peter, I don't know much about highways, and I've been reading about highways ever since." And he said, "You're going to be the ranking Democrat on transportation." And that's been quite a challenge, as you can imagine, with this budget cycle. So Kathleen and I are going to talk through some of the difficult issues that are facing the state at this point, particularly with regard to the budget. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. We're going to begin with some general information about the budget. It's kind of a arcane, complicated process, and we're trying to make it as easy to understand as it allows. The state budget affects many, many parts of our lives, and this slide is just a kind of reminder about all the different parts of our lives that end up being in the state budget. We're sitting right here in a building that is funded in part by the state budget, in part by property tax, but some of the money for librarians and libraries come from the state. This is a slide that shows us the amount of the dollars in the state budget. Wisconsin has a 2-year budget. So every 2 years we come up with a new budget. The 2 blue lines are Governor Doyle's last budgets. You can see it's kind of flat right here. This was the recession. And then you can see that the budget has climbed steadily. It's been about 2% a year, roughly 2% a year growth. And it is about the same this year as it was last year, as it was the year before. So the last 3 budgets have grown about the same amount. Right now, the entire budget that the governor is proposing is over $76 billion, and that's a 2-year budget, so there's a lot of money in the budget. This slide shows you where the money comes from. When I look at the slide, I think about this little part here, the little one. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit your head. And is
Always watch for little dots.
Yeah, little dots in the back of your head.
Red dots.
Red dots. So you often hear legislators talk about the general budget or the total budget. The general budget includes what we think of as our state taxes. So the blue here is income tax, so that's the largest single part of the general budget. The yellow is sales tax. Corporate tax is 6% and dropping in a big time. Then we have utility tax and tax on liquor and tobacco. But the big 2 are income and sales. That makes up a good section of the entire state budget, about 45%. The federal dollars come in, make almost 30%, 29%. So what happens at the federal level is very important to what happens at the state level. Program revenue is what we call money that comes in from fees. So say you run a restaurant, you pay to be inspected. That money goes into something we call program revenue. It's also where some of the money from the university comes for students that pay fees. And then segregated revenue includes a number of dollars that are set aside for just a certain purpose. The biggest purpose is transportation, but it's not the only purpose. This is a slide that shows you the revenue over the last 26 years. This drop in revenue is the first George Bush recession. This is the second George Bush recession, and this here little flat part is probably the result of Act 10. This happened in 2012, right after Act 10 passed, that the budget, the amount of money coming in actually dropped. Which makes sense, because people didn't have as much money to spend. I think of the revenue coming in and gradually increasing, shows us the economy is gradually increasing. We want to see that upturn. The only time we don't see the money coming in as same as it was the year before is if there was a recession or close to a recession. So I think Just because these numbers are going up doesn't mean they might not have gone up a little bit more had the state been in a little bit better shape. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. One of the things that cuts into state money coming in are something that we talk about called tax credits. We use the term in the capital foregone revenue. And it basically means money that we expected to see, but then it went away. It never came in. It was gone, foregone revenue. What we have seen in Wisconsin is a great increase in the amount of tax credits just since 2012. So the red line is dollars, and these little numbers off to the side show you the types of credits. So when you think of credits, I'm showing you two things on this slide: the types of credits and the dollar amount. So just like types of ice cream would be chocolate or vanilla, types of credits would include things like the enterprise tax credit, a jobs credit, historic development credit, different types of credits. There's been a big explosion in the types of credits as well as the dollar amount. This next slide shows you just one type of credit, and that is the enterprise zone tax credit. The enterprise zone tax credit is a refundable tax credit. If you think about paying your taxes, and let's say that you owed $2,500 in taxes, but got a credit for $2,000 for whatever you did. Maybe you paid for your son to go to college, and you were able to write off some of that on your taxes. Then you would pay that. If you had to pay $2,500 and you got a $2,000 tax credit, you'd only pay $500. Let's say you didn't owe anything, or you had a tax credit that was much bigger than how much you owed. If it was refundable, you would actually get a refund from the state coffers. And that's what this type of tax credit is. I know you can't see all these companies, but I did want to put them up there because you can see how very large these numbers are. Now, these awards can be claimed sometimes for 15 to 20 years after they've been made, which is why I put the little green box that says some of these awards will be claimed into 2024, which means if we do nothing in terms of more tax credits, this line is going to continue to go up like this, because these tax credits I mentioned are going to be claimed. Now, it just so happens, right before this presentation, just a day ago, the Legislative Audit Bureau just released an audit of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We call it by short WEDC, or sometimes we call it WEDC. What this group does is award grants, loans, and tax credits. And they've done a lot. But the law since 2008 has said that the state must independently verify that the promised jobs have been created. And what the audit showed us is that that was not happening in compliance with the law. How do I say this? The CEO of Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation said that they have made a good first start in starting to verify these independently, that the promised jobs have been created. The auditors found that none of the companies that got these awards in 2016, the companies that got awards in 2016, there were 32 of them, none of them were verified to make sure that they had actually created or had a plan to create these jobs. They might have said that they created it, but they didn't actually independently verify. So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to give you these jobs. It's another thing for you to say, oh, Kathleen, I'm going to come and I'm going to look at your payroll and I'm going to count where you were then and where you are now. That's what we're looking at, some independent verification. I mention all this because it goes back to our revenue chart. If we don't have the money coming in because the tax credits have been taking away the money, then the money can't be used for other things. And we have seen in the past year a very big drop in the incoming corporate income tax. So overall, the year-to-date overall is down 9%. In one single month, comparing month to month a year ago, it was down 22%. So this means this is something I'm putting at the very beginning because I want to show you how this affects the money that we have for all the things we're going to talk about that the state government buys. And Dana wants to add a little bit to this.
Well, that's one of the things in corporate planning, these folks will use these credits to their advantage at times that sometimes it's hard for us to plan. Our revenues are dropping due in large part to the use of these credits. And is it really effective in terms of building jobs, building an economy? I think not. I think,
That's what we got to know.
yeah, and it's better to invest in the middle class rather than the top corporate class, frankly.
I now want to talk a little bit about the economy because the state revenue numbers are driven by what's happening in the economy. This is a quote from one of the Department of Revenue experts that came to talk to the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce earlier this year. Wisconsin's economy is in the best shape it's been in the last 15 years. Everything in green is a direct quote from that chamber presentation. So the Department of Revenue said that wages have improved to their highest level ever. And I did a little research to kind of fact check some of these things. So I'm going to show you my research. My research came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the federal government website. Well, it's wages. It's actually true. Wages have increased, and wages have increased in every single state in the union. They are at their highest level ever in all 50 states. And Wisconsin is ranked 18th lowest of the entire country. Wisconsin is ranked 4th, this is a direct quote, 4th in the U.S. for manufacturing jobs gained since 2009. Actually, Wisconsin lost 66,000 manufacturing jobs in the recession, and in 8 years we've only gained back 2/3 or 44,000. And then finally, Wisconsin, this is a direct quote, Wisconsin was 11th highest in the nation for real gross domestic product, which is what people call economic growth. And actually, we're not 11th highest, we are 23rd, and we are behind Arkansas, Georgia, and every Midwest neighbor except Illinois.
And, one other thing to add to this is, the wages have improved across the United States, due in large part to increased minimum wages on the East and West Coasts. That has been a significant impactor of these statistics, whereas we're stagnating. Our economy and our folks are having to work on 2 different jobs in order to get, to keep a roof over their homes. That's a trend that needs to be reversed.
Jobs have been created. And what the audit showed us is that that was not happening in compliance with the law. How do I say this? The CEO of Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation said that they have made a good first start in starting to verify these independently, that the promised jobs have been created. The auditors found that none of the companies that got these awards in 2016, the companies that got awards in 2016, there were 32 of them, none of them were verified to make sure that they had actually created or had a plan to create these jobs. They might have said that they created it, but they didn't actually independently verify. So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to give you these jobs. It's another thing for you to say, oh, Kathleen, I'm going to come and I'm going to look at your payroll and I'm going to count where you were then and where you are now. They revised them downwards several times. So originally they thought we were going to get about 4%. Then they revised them to about 3%. Now they're down to about 2%. They're still going up. But if the economy was improving like the governor suggests, the revenue estimates would be coming in better than were originally, the revenue money would be coming in better than originally thought, not worse. And this is over a time period of about 2 years. And it's revenue related to this year, the budget year we're in right now. And then when we look at the future, the growth is about the same in this budget as it has been in the last two budgets. It's roughly around 2%. New jobs, I mentioned a little bit of manufacturing. When we look at overall jobs, Wisconsin didn't gain back the jobs lost in the recession until 2015, a full year after the nation and 2 full years after Minnesota. And then faster growth, again comparing to Minnesota, if we look at the economic growth since 2012, Minnesota grew faster than the national average, Wisconsin grew slower, which is exactly what Dana just mentioned.
And amazingly, we're now 50th in the nation in terms of startups for new innovative jobs and the like. So I mean, I don't know, you can't do any worse than that.
So you think about these tax credits as having a public purpose. And the public purpose is to grow the economy and grow jobs. That's the public purpose. But if the auditors have found in 3 different audits that they never measured the jobs created independently, and when they did measure them, the numbers were not accurate to what the companies promised, it makes you wonder if this is such a great investment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about where the money goes. And this is the same difference that I mentioned before. All funds is on the left and general funds is on the right. You may hear some political people saying, oh, we spend more money on schools than anything else. They are talking about the general fund budget. And if you look at the general fund budget, K-12 is the largest single part. It's about 34%. If you look at all funds, which includes program revenue, segregated revenue, federal revenue, then healthcare is the largest part. I will say about healthcare takes about 1/3 of the budget and is growing faster than any other part of the budget. So we're going to talk first a little bit about healthcare. So this is the whole budget, but it's a line graph instead of a pie graph. And the thing that you notice right away is everything's kind of flat. The UW is growing, but that's because the federal money, and so this isn't just the state money, this includes the federal money. But what's really growing is healthcare. And I wondered why. What's going on? So we started digging. And what we found is that the number of people that are served by the health programs has remained roughly flat. It's only changed by 28,000 since the governor took over in 2011. But the amount of money being spent has grown dramatically. It's risen by almost $4 billion, $3.7 billion. And I thought, what's going on? How could I figure this out? So I started asking the Fiscal Bureau questions several years ago and asked them about private companies getting paid to administer the Medicaid program. And what I learned, here's 2011, just because Dana and I are Democrats, we mentioned when the Democrats lost power and the Republicans took over. What you see right here is a very large increase in the number of private companies getting contracts to administer the public Medicaid program. Just last week, this past week, the Budget Committee took up the contracts on Medicaid. And when I was reading through the papers that were used to brief the Finance Committee members, I discovered a few interesting nuggets of knowledge. I discovered the Department of Health, in the coming budget, built in a 5% inflationary increase every year in the contracts going forward. And I said, oh, well, we should change that. And I went to my Finance Committee member friends and said, here's an amendment, we need to change that. And the Fiscal Bureau called me up and said, well, Senator Vinehout, you can't do that. And I said, well, why can't I? And they said, because the contract has already been signed for the new year. The state's already committed to a 5% per year inflationary increase. Do you know, Dana, any state employee that has gotten a 5% increase in a single year? I don't think they've had a 5% increase in the last 10 years. So how is it that there's 10% built into this contract and it's been signed before the legislature even took up the budget? Well, you know what? That's just the way they did it over in the Department of Health. I also learned that if the state outsources the administration of Medicaid, it costs 30% more. So then I wrote another budget amendment to say, well, let's bring more people in the House. And I actually think we got some support from the Republicans on that. Not as much as I would like. But anyway, here's one of the little nuggets of knowledge about why this budget is increasing as fast as it is in health. It's not because the state is covering more people. I have done an alternative to the governor's budget. It's a big spreadsheet that shows a lot of different ways to shuffle around the priorities, to make different choices. I am doing some things that my Democratic colleagues pretty much all agree on, and looking at how we can do this differently. So the first thing is to take the Medicaid expansion, something the Democrats have been talking about for a long time. Because some of the people covered now by the state would be covered more by the federal government, we actually end up with $286 million in savings in our pocket to spend on other things, as well as covering almost 80,000 more people. And that's hard to understand. I have had a number of people say, I just don't understand this, how could it be? And it's because the state is providing care for these people, and if the federal government comes in and opens the door for more people for Medicaid, they not only pay for what they're opening the door for, they also pay for some of the people we're already covering. Nursing homes are reimbursed at one of the lowest reimbursement rates through Medicaid in the entire country. The governor is increasing this by 2%. We're looking at, in this budget, we're looking at a 4% increase in the alternative budget. Personal care workers, I heard when I was in Prescott a few days ago, the personal care workers up there get $8.50 an hour, and they haven't had a raise in a really long time. The governor of Minnesota a few years ago put a big increase for personal care workers who take care of the elderly and the disabled. And the governor is giving a very small increase, and I increased that by more than double to 4%. Many of you have worked with alternatives to incarceration here in Eau Claire. Eau Claire is a leader around the entire state. The governor is only keeping that funding at the same level as it was in the last budget. It's about $2 million, $2.5 million. I took that to $20 million to expand it to the whole state, just to give you a feel for what the alternatives to incarceration can do, is that they can use basically a carrot and a stick approach to keep people clean and working in the community rather than incarcerated because they have a drug addiction problem. We have a problem with prenatal moms not getting care. Half of all of the babies born in the state of Wisconsin are born to moms on Medicaid, and yet we have very high neonatal intensive care rate for Medicaid. What I think we need to do is make sure that all of those moms have prenatal care, which helps the moms be healthy, the babies be healthy, and brings down costs to our system. It's a no-brainer to me. And then finally, there's a study that came out last summer from the healthcare group called Robert Wood Johnson, and I have the source over to the side, that says if states can do one thing to help people recovering from addiction, it is to expand Medicaid. Because at least for now, until something happens in Washington for sure on health care, at least for now, mental health and addiction services are covered services under Medicaid. Yeah.
Is there any Republican support at all now for Medicaid expansion?
No. In Wisconsin.
Sometimes we'll hear some Republican colleagues say that they might think about it in a whole district, but it hasn't happened in Madison, and it's been an amendment that the Democrats have been working on since probably 2013.
Because there are Republican states that have taken.
Oh, many. Michigan is an example. Ohio, Kentucky. There's all kinds of examples. This should not be a partisan issue.
Right, yeah.
What we've got is ideology overshadowing the needs of the people in the state. This particular governor started out by turning down $800 million for a high-speed rail system. If that isn't gubernatorial malpractice, I don't know what is. He turns that down, and now we have to keep resurfacing the highways that would have taken traffic off of. Had he just accepted that money, there'd be high-speed rail going from Chicago to Madison every day at this point. He turns down $23 million for broadband expansion in rural Wisconsin. And why is that? Nobody can figure that out, except that it's an ideological bent of his to prove to his Republican buddies on the East Coast that he can be a staunch ideologue. He's looking at a different office, and that's what he's running for, and we're paying the price. And then he turns down this Medicaid expense. It's just mindless. I mean, we have, what is it, 10,000 jobs would be picked up?
Oh, yeah.
There'd be
absolutely.
10,000
Not to mention the
additional people working.
people who could have health care and not got.
So it's not in the interest of this state, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kathleen,
Yes.
the governor is talking a lot about money for meth addiction, and he's got several programs that he evidently has put, and I don't remember the amounts of money, but I don't understand how does that relate to the fact that he is not increasing, as you said, at $2 million, when we're hoping, we've gone down and asked so many of you to help add at least 15 million to it, and he's going to do nothing? Well, where does the meth stuff that's in the paper, where does that come in?
There are a lot of very, very small bills. So there is a bill that would allow for 2 treatment centers in the state, and we don't know where those treatment centers are going to be. There are little tiny bills that maybe help a little, but they don't deal with the overall problem. I'm glad you brought up.
Treatment alternatives and diversions are
Right,
not
well,
a
and the bigger
Right.
problem that meth is affecting, that meth is causing. The state has really become a leader, or at least in talk, about heroin, because Representative Nygren, who's from the Green Bay area, has a daughter who's addicted to heroin. We in western Wisconsin are facing a big problem with methamphetamines, and it's especially affecting all those counties that are along the interstate. So Eau Claire and La Crosse, Jackson, Toma, all this whole area, even across 29 all the way to Green Bay, but it's especially affecting western Wisconsin. I've had every single county from my district come to me and say, please give us more money for a number of problems that we're facing. One of them is out-of-home child placement because their parents are addicted to meth. And the children are all tested with hair follicle tests. And one of the people in Trempealeau told me that they tested a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they found out that the 1-year-old and 3-year-old had more meth in their body through the hair follicle test than an adult addict. So, and they have seen their number of out-of-home child placements related to meth quadruple in the last short time period.
And where are they going?
And that's a good question. And they're going to foster families or kinship care. Somehow we're trying to find out-of-home placements, but that's very, very difficult and getting worse. Now, to think of the issues that the addict is facing, law enforcement is telling me that when you combine mental health and heroin addiction, you usually have a person in the emergency room. When you combine mental health and meth addiction, you have someone who becomes violent and usually ends up in jail. So law enforcement is telling me that they, in Buffalo County, they have used up their entire allotment for transporting meth addicted mentally ill people to Mendota, which is the only place they seem to be able to find an opening. They've used up their entire allotment for transporting people for the entire year of 2017
Plus,
in
there
the
are only
first
2
2
places-
months.
There are only 2 places they can be taken.
Mendota and Winnebago.
And those places have always, for years, have had long waiting lists. We need the beds.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
So
that's another
this is a crisis. So when I presented this in another town hall meeting the day before yesterday, there was a man from La Crosse who was a psychologist, and he said if we could increase the Medicaid reimbursement rates for mental health, we could increase the placements. Because right now, we have openings for long-term recovery from meth addiction, but Medicaid doesn't cover those services. And so, hang on just a second, Jeff. What I am doing in this budget, in addition to things I just told you about, is increasing the reimbursement rate for mental health in a similar way that was done in New Jersey. And when you combine the federal and the state dollars, which is how we pay for Medicaid, we are increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate by $74 million, which is what they did in New Jersey, which could help us bring practitioners over from Minnesota who right now are choosing to stay in Hastings instead of coming to Prescott or Hudson or Eau Claire.
And that's another big shortage, of course.
Yes,
Are
of the mental health
providers of the
professionals.
healthcare, the mental health
Yes.
care, we need that, and
Yes.
that's not even available.
Yes, thank you for your patience.
And then to really illustrate the contradiction between the lip service on treating drug addiction and the inability or unwillingness to take Medicaid expansion, the governor has proposed testing Medicaid recipients for drugs,
Yeah, oh geez.
which just doubles up on taking away the
And
people who need it the most.
for food share. Absolutely, absolutely. I was adding up all the different pieces of that drug testing because it shows up in about 6 different ways, 6 different programs. And if we added up all of them, we're talking of tens of millions of dollars that's costing the state to do this testing. And actually, the research shows in other states that the people who are on Badger Care, especially the 100% of poverty or less, are no more or no less than the general population to use drugs. And a lot of them are children and elderly.
And they
Remember,
need it.
2/3 of Medicaid are elderly, long-term care. Yes, Maureen?
On the whole addiction issue, okay, so if you want to do the testing, is there going to be money then there for treatment? And is it going to be treatment that provides the aftercare and support, which is so important to people who are recovering from addiction? If you just give them the blast of treatment and there's not an aftercare program in place, then forget it, because they need that kind of support. The other thing that concerns me, and I used to work in the schools and worked a lot with addiction issues and that, and meth and all that was just coming in, so I'm not real familiar with that. But money for addiction services and treatment, and they pull it out because, well, we're going to talk about heroin and we're going to talk about meth. Does that leave people who have alcohol addiction with no services? Where is that at?
I think it leaves people with all types of addiction problems without the services, because if we don't pay the providers, if we don't create the services, like you talked about, Jackie, and having to go to Winnebago and having to go to Mendota, there's no crisis center here. If we don't create the services here, then we don't solve the problem. So it's one thing to dribble a few little dollars and say we're going to put a few little dollars in this and a few little dollars in that. It's another thing to tackle the real problem, which is that we need community-based alternatives. And it's something that Minnesota did in the 60s and 70s, community-based services. We didn't. We need to create that infrastructure, and it's one of the reasons why Minnesota has half of the incarcerated people that we have when we've got about the same crime rate, about the same population. Which I know many of you have thought about this a lot, and if you have questions that I'm moving too fast or we're moving too fast, let us know. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that there's.
Here, why don't you take this?
You mentioned that there's an ideological discrepancy here, and I really challenge your use of that term.
Could you turn the mic on, please?
It's actually just, the mic is just for community television, so we'll have to repeat the question.
Oh, okay.
So it's not going to sound any different to us, but it is going to sound a lot different to the people at home.
Oh.
Well, just with regard to your term ideology, I really dispute that, because that is a word that implies that the governor's thinking, or anybody's thinking, is based on a set of values and morals. They may be different than mine or yours, but they are a fundamental foundation of thinking. And I don't think that's present in this governor. I think what's present in this governor is greed. And if you follow the money, particularly about the drug addiction thing, those people are ending up in prison. We have the largest prison population in the country. There's a lot of money that's gone into those institutions, private institutions. Follow the money, because I think that's coming right back to his pocket, or the pocket of his supporters. I don't think there's ideals, there are no values, there are no morals there at all. It's all greed.
Well, and
Excuse me, I don't think the microphone is on.
Pete, maybe
No, it
Pete,
doesn't.
this just works on the,
There's no speaker system in here.
Oh,
this is just working with the television here.
maybe repeat what you said.
No, I think we're on the same page, frankly. I mean, there's a saying in the building now that there really isn't any policy, it's all payback. That's what's going on. And, I mean, it's not 100% that that's what's going on, but there's, in large part, you want an iron bill? Well, you know, iron ore bill, you go ahead and you donate and you'll get an iron ore bill. I mean, there's a lot of that that's going on. And in terms of the policy with regard to what we were talking about here, Eau Claire and Milwaukee got federal money, I think through the Obama administration, or was it before, it might have been Bush, for pilot projects on alternative courts. And we're saving tens of thousands of dollars per year by keeping people out of prison. It's the smartest dollar we can invest outside of K through 12 and university and technical school. It's really good money spent on these programs, because if you go through the penal system, just about everybody in there either has a substance abuse problem or has a mental problem due in some part to a substance abuse problem, or they've been abused as children. I mean, it's all coming back to much of it's coming back to the same thing. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, things of that. It really has a bearing and an effect. And in terms of ideology, what I was getting at is there are certain basic principles that the folks that tell the Republicans what to do have. And they don't want to spend much money on humans. That's the ideology I'm talking about.
We're going to talk a little bit about education, ag, and DNR. So I'm going to move on, but healthcare will definitely be hovering over our conversations. Many of us know about the difficulties facing schools. We had a very large referendum here in Eau Claire. Many schools are facing teacher shortages. The limits, the revenue limits haven't increased in schools for 3 years, and there are none in this budget. The private school program called the voucher program hits a new high in terms of dollars in this budget. Many of you have heard Dana and I both talk about child poverty, which has more than doubled in 10 years. And we have a broken formula. The formula right now doesn't acknowledge the changes that are happening in the state, the increase in poverty, the increase in children who don't speak English as a second language, the difficulties for rural schools. When we lose one student, the aid for that student completely goes away. Half of it, if it's coming half and half of it from the state goes away, but then because of the formula, a little tiny bit goes away from all the other students, so the school basically loses the entire student in terms of state aid. Now, rather than fix the formula, what the governor decided to do was add over $500 million outside of the formula, which is what I would call a Band-Aid. It's saying, well, we'll get through this year, but we're not going to fix what the real problems are. And there are a lot of alternatives. This is a map you may have seen before. The dark red means over 60% poverty, I think, if you can see. Let's see if I can see this. Yeah, I think the darkest red is 60%, the orange is 20 to 40, the medium red is 40 to 60. So you can see the big change that have happened over the years. Here's a few choices that the governor has made. The aid through the formula is below the 2008-2009 school year. The increase in total public aid school public aid since the recession is about 8%. The increase in public money going to private schools has increased by 90%. And then just to add a little levity to the situation, I want to remind everybody that the governor is actually taking over the operations of Circus World in this budget. And I figured we could have a state-run Circus World Museum, but we can't have state-run public schools. Makes me wonder.
There's kind of
Something bad there.
consistency there. Yeah, it's amazing. We're not, I think probably outside of health, the most important thing we can spend money on is education. I mean, we don't have to look, and we haven't got to higher ed yet, but we don't have to look very far on what higher ed does for an economy. I mean, in Madison, you look at EPIC, comes directly from the University of Wisconsin. You look down the street here at JAM, it comes directly from the music department at UW-Eau Claire. So we're hiring thousands of people across the state due directly to higher education investment. I mean, General Electric is moving from Connecticut to downtown Boston just to be closer to 55 universities that are doing research, because they understand, private industry understands, that investing in higher education, it doesn't just bring new jobs, it brings entire new industries. Jobs are being created in industries that have never existed before. And this is, you know, we're penny wise and dollar foolish in this budget in so many respects.
We're going to get to the university in just a slide, but this shows you the money going into public schools. The bottom line, this is adjusted for inflation, norming it to 2003, which is right in here. So you can see, and this is the amount, the $500 million that the governor's putting in. I didn't have inflation numbers for this coming budget because obviously it hadn't happened yet. This is the private school, public money going to private schools. This is how it's changed since 1991. You can see that there's been a big increase, a steeper slope in just the last few years, and even steeper in this coming budget. Here is a solution to the problem. Tony Evers has put an alternative fixing the funding program. He put this alternative forward in the 11 budget, the 13 budget, the 15 budget, and the 17 budget. Remember, it's a 2-year budget. And he deals with all of these problems, giving each school $3,000 minimum per student, helping with children in poverty, helping with special ed costs, because right now the state only pays 26%, slowly moving it up to 30% in this budget. Dealing with costs, special ed costs over $30,000, which is very hard for the schools to deal with. Helping students coming from another language, helping rural schools, etc. I want to show you what happens if the state does not fund public school. And you know it because you live or are near Eau Claire and you see. Here's a comparison of two states spending about the same. The yellow is the state funding, and the red is the property tax funding. The blue is federal, which is about the same. Minnesota spends 68%, 68 cents of every dollar from the state. Wisconsin's only 52%. And look at how big the red is. It's shifted directly to property taxes. Think of property taxes and state spending kind of like a teeter-totter. As one goes up, the other goes down. And the form it goes down in, or goes up in, is in the referenda that are passed. And here's the same numbers I just showed you, but a little bit different. Whose pocket is it coming out of? Well, if the state isn't paying, local people want to keep their schools, and just like so many other communities around the state, Eau Claire voted to keep their schools, and they were not alone. In 2016, a historic high of 79% of the referenda around the state passed. Of the 65 questions on the ballot in April 17, 62% of them passed.
But now there's bills in the hopper to restrict us locally to go out to referendum. So because we were successful in talking about where we sit as a district in Eau Claire, we are now going to have bills that are going to not allow us to do that, and some of them will take away what we've built.
What Chris is the president of the school board here in Eau Claire, and what Chris is talking about has been something that's been rumbling around for a couple of sessions now. The idea is to say, we're not going to give the local people local power to save their school. We're going to take away their ability to pass the referendum. And this is why. The why behind why these bills are coming forward is, despite what the governor might say, or some of our colleagues might say, property taxes are growing, There was a little tiny blip in here when the governor put some money into tech colleges, but they're still the highest they've ever been in the history of the state. The governor is fiddling around a little bit with property taxes in this budget again, but frankly, the solution is very clear. If we want to lower property taxes, we need to put more state money into schools. It has to happen. It's the way the formula works. Now to talk about the UW. These are just two of the sources of money for the UW, but they are two of the most important sources. Again, we're talking about state support and tuition. And you can see the same teeter-totter effect. As state support drops, tuition increases. The yellow is the tuition line. Now there are other sources of money. There's federal sources, there's fee sources, but these are the two most important. Why do I bring this up? Because in this budget, the governor is suggesting that he lower tuition by 5% by putting $30 million into the budget for schools from the state. Now, those of you who are paying attention know that last year the governor cut about $250 million from the state budget. So putting that money back, little tiny bit, is nowhere near what needs to be done to fix the University of Wisconsin.
And also remember that Walker increased tuition 5.5% in 2011, I think it was, in that budget cycle. So now he's going to roll it back a little bit. Let's keep an eye on
You
who's
see that little
digging.
increase there, right where the two lines cross.
Keep an eye on who's digging the hole in the first place, and now you're going to throw some dirt in it. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
One of the desires I had when I did the math to put together an alternative to the governor's budget was to hold his parameters constant. To say, you know, we're not going to make any big changes in money coming in or money going out, but let's look at how we can move around $2 billion around. So it's I'm looking at the general fund part of the budget, which is about somewhere between 15 and 16 billion a year, and I moved around $2 billion around, which I'm going to show you a little bit on the end. That's that extra handout. But what I did was I fully funded the UW. I increased the amount of money back to before the big $250 million cut. I put in another $100 million for financial aid, and then I decided to see what it would take to give free tuition to every two-year UW campus and every tech college for all students coming in from the state of Wisconsin. And I put all that together in the alternative that I'm going to show you towards the end of the presentation, and I found that indeed we could do it with the amount of money in this budget. And I thought, wow.
And you've got to bear in mind, too, that Minnesota passed a bill recently that fully funds tuition for the two-year schools. But it doesn't have to fully fund it. What you do is, if a student is getting a Pell Grant or getting some kind of federal subsidy and the like, the state will fill up the rest of it. But you go ahead and you take your federal money, something that this governor doesn't like to do, but you let the student apply for and get these grants and whatever, and then the state can make up the difference, so that in the end, it comes out that the state doesn't have to pay the full freight.
Yep, that's Dana's spot on, and that's happening right now under a Republican governor in Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah. So hey, we can do this.
It just passed in Minnesota.
We can do this, and New York too. Dana talked a little bit about transportation. Transportation is going to be the sticking point. It's going to be the most difficult part to figure out, mainly because there's too much money going out and not enough money coming in. You've heard a lot about it. I have a few little details that you can read related to the roads. The first two bullet points come from the Wisconsin Towns Association. I'll draw your attention to the second bullet point. With the current funding, the towns reconstruct a road every 371 years. And the towns, some of whom were at my presentation up in Prescott a couple days ago, the town board chair in El Paso Township said, you know what? We plan roads to last about 30 or 40 years. And that's why folks who work in towns all across the state are turning those rural roads back into gravel. It's the only way to deal with this cut.
And oddly enough, gravel actually costs more to maintain than regular.
This is a great reason. It washes out easily.
2013, the governor, excuse my voice, 2013, there was a gubernatorial study done in the state of Wisconsin dealing in great detail with what it would take to fully fund our highway system. And Governor Walker commissioned that study, and not one thing recommended in that study has been done. That study recommended enhancing revenue with re-indexing the gas tax, gasoline fuel tax, things of that nature, which really are adult solutions. It's, you know, we have to put adult solutions into this mix, or we're not going to have an infrastructure that's worth anything. The other thing is I don't know where, if you talk about bonding in here at some point.
At the very last one, so go ahead and take
We're bonding
take it away.
so much on vertical. I'm on the building commission and I'm ranking Democrat in transportation. And we are bonding so much money on vertical construction instead of horizontal construction that it's slowing our ability to maintain and, more importantly, build new structures at places like university campuses and the like. For instance, at UW-Eau Claire, Phillips Science Building needs to be replaced. Before that can be replaced, we've got to tear down 2 different dorms, but before we can do that, we have to make room for those students by building another one and repairing the towers dorms. So what we have is a massive logjam that's being created because of this governor's fiscal policies in terms of transportation and building. Now, the irony of this is that most dorms, many of these buildings, are paid for by the students themselves. So it's really no hair off of our budget to let these buildings go forward. And in terms of, during one of the budget building commission sessions, I openly discussed this with the governor. I recommended, contrary to the governor's recommendation, I asked that new chemistry buildings be built at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, another building be built down there, a new engineering building at the University of Platteville, and a host of other buildings. And the reason I did this is that there are studies that demonstrate specifically that investing in things like engineering schools will bring about a robust economy. This is just, we are constantly penny wise and dollar foolish with some of this, and some of it is nonsensical because some of these are segregated fees that are going to pay for these buildings. So it really doesn't affect the bottom line. But for ideological grounds or just obstinate, they're refusing to go forward with some of these projects. So what we're creating is a massive logjam that we will have to fix down the road. Eventually, the Democrats will have to do the right thing and fix this. And then they'll be screaming bloody murder because we're actually building things. But that's how you have an economy that works, is you build things and you invest in the middle class. That's how you have an economy that works, and you won't have the budget crunches that we have. Minnesota has $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion surplus. So it can be done. We're the same economy function.
Absolutely. Just to call your attention to the very last bullet point, you'll hear a lot about bonding, which is the way that the state pays for things. In borrowing, it's what we would call debt. Think of the credit card. And in 1995, 6.5% of the transportation dollars went to paying off debt. By the end of this budget, it's estimated to be about 22%. So a lot of people in a lot of different walks of life have said, just fix it. Get the math to work and just fix it. Whatever you need to do. They mentioned one of the studies on transportation. Another study that came forward in the 15-17 budget was the former Secretary of Transportation. He put together 24 issue papers in his 600-page budget. Here are a few of the ideas that he mentioned. At the bottom, you can see that the governor denied all these requests. I will mention one that has been popular when I've done these town hall meetings in other places. Wisconsin Railroad owns, and this is a little different than what your PowerPoint says, because I just got an update yesterday from the Nonpartisan Fiscal Bureau. We own outright 624 miles of freight rail line. The railroads pay nothing to use the line. They pay only 20% to maintain it. The rest is borrowed by the state, 80% of the maintenance, and then 100% of the purchase price. The Secretary of Transportation suggested a modest $10 a carload fee for the railroads using statewide rail lines. The governor said no. So I bet you didn't know that you own over 600 miles of freight rail line as a Wisconsin taxpayer.
Would the hybrid and electric car registration fee be equivalent to what the gas tax would be?
Probably not directly. When I saw that, I drive a hybrid, and when I saw that, I'm like, no, this is exactly the opposite of what we want to be encouraging. We want to encourage people to drive hybrids, and we want to encourage them to drive electric cars. And then I did all the math for redoing the transportation budget. This was 2 years ago. And I saw what a mess the transportation budget was. And I thought, you know, I can pay $50 a year for a fee for my hybrid. I get 42 miles a gallon average. I could do that.
Well, why couldn't you put a carbon tax on something? I mean, I know I said the words. I said
Yeah, the answer is you got to get the votes. And my brother-in-law drives an electric car, and it totally makes sense that they would pay something. But when you do studies on the roads, it's not the little electric car that's using up the road. It's the really big freight rail, thank you. So another, I don't know if I have it. Oh yeah, I do. Increase the diesel fuel tax by about 10 cents a gallon.
That should be much higher, because I just read an article in the paper today about diesel and what it's doing to our air. It's much worse than anybody's ever.
And your point is really well taken, which is let's do a study. Let's look at who's using the roads. Let's tie the use of the roads to the damage that's being done on the roads. It's an awesome idea. It's an idea that a lot of other states use. Other states use like a weight distance tax. So they tie the weight with the distance, and then figure people are paying their way. Everybody pays their way as they go along. It's you know, everybody's got to pay their own way. So that, I think that's an awesome policy idea.
I don't understand that diesel tax system, because I think, don't they get a lot of credit back? Don't they get a lot of their money back? These interstate trucking companies, when they pay their taxes, they file and they get a lot of it back later on.
Yeah, well, that I can't tell you that, having never been talked with the trucking companies about that. Maybe they do and they didn't tell me. I mean, they do talk to me, but they didn't tell me that part.
It's a change that happens sometimes. So you got
Yeah,
10 years.
it would be considered expensive doing business. So maybe that's what you're thinking. Yeah, Chris.
Yesterday was our chamber eggs and issues, and it was trains, planes, and automobiles. So Craig Thompson was there. I mean, he's somebody in the state.
Craig Thompson does lobbying for, I want to say, the trucking industry.
Transportation.
Whatever. He was giving some information though that I think it's important for people to know, which I didn't.
Here, let me give you the mic.
No.
Just so you can talk.
But you know, I never knew they did a measure of roughness of roads.
Oh, they do, absolutely.
And I thought that was interesting, if no one's ever known that before.
Yes.
They take something across all the roads in the country and it measures the roughness of the roads. And Wisconsin is 49 in International Roughness Index. I thought, at least they're measuring it, and that's what he said. So I think too, his other information that he gave was the County Highway Commission survey that they just recently took. The average replacement schedule is 200 years.
Oh my God, it's just like the town
So, I
association,
know,
371.
So,
Wow, that's really valuable information.
But the other thing I said when they were talking about, when you bring this up, and you bring up you bring up the medical and Medicaid, and you bring up public school, and you bring up higher ed, and you bring up transportation, we are all vying for the same money. And your message about looking at a bigger picture on how it can be reallocated or used in a different way is probably the single most message that comes to me now in trying to explain to people that we can pay for this stuff. The money is there. It's how we are choosing to spend that money. And that's an important message, and I said that at the meeting.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for reminding us of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about ag and natural resources, and this is the last section. There are a number of budget cuts from the last budget that affect agriculture. A lot of people were surprised to hear that extension and 4-H were cut because the University of Wisconsin dollars were cut. Extension and 4-H are treasured all across the state, and the proposals that are coming out about extension include putting one ag agent in an urban area. For example, our Buffalo County would be in La Crosse, and having 5 counties around that urban area be served by that one single ag agent. If we think about innovation, and you mentioned startups, so we're last or nearly last in startups in the United States. If you think about our strengths, if you think about innovation, what we need are ag agents to help think of really outside the box, awesome ideas to use our natural resources and work with nature to come up with a product that people want to buy. And go to the Eau Claire Farmers Market to see the diversity of those innovative ideas happening right here in our neighborhood. Whether it's goat cheese or community-supported agriculture or Mung Gardens, there are so many wonderful ideas. But those people to do those ideas need the technical support that Extension provides, and we're very much, I'm afraid, in danger of losing.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Do you know, have they cut monies for the land conservationists?
Yes, and that's what I took the words right out of my mouth. Another service that ag and the counties provide are to support what I would call, I've called up here, watershed management grants. Again, this comes through Extension. And a good example of one of these watershed management grants that are happening right here in our neighborhood is the Red Cedar Watershed Grant, which is working very hard to clean up the lakes in Menominee. And these grants are being totally eliminated in the budget. Another program that's being eliminated is a very small fee on the utilities, very, very, very small. The rural electric utilities that goes to pay for a stray voltage program. And when we started milking cows in our family, we had a stray voltage problem. And I'm hearing a lot more about stray voltage problems when the big high capacity power lines went in going south of Alma all the way down to Madison. And that's being eliminated. And the other thing that I'm mentioning, there's a lot of little details in this area, but at the Ag Workforce and Workforce Development Council, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. It's ag education to encourage new farmers. And that was something special that we did in the 2009 budget when Doug had control. It was a bill that I had. And they're taking it away, they're moving it into workforce development where it doesn't belong.
Kathleen, are they doing anything that's going to affect the Extension Natural Resources educators?
Yes.
There were talks of cutting them.
Yes, yes, yes.
There's a natural resource educator right there with UW Extension.
Can you tell us?
He can tell us all about it.
I'm Dan Zur, I'm the Regional Natural Resource Educator with UW Extension. From what we gather, and a lot of this came from
So our people at home are going to be so frustrated if they can't hear you.
Jim Vandenbroek, who's the head of the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Organization, put together some data about this for us. And DNR's budget has a line item, and even though we're extension employees and natural resource educators, there's about 10 of us around the state. Even though we're extension employees, the majority of my salary comes from DNR. There's a line item in DNR's budget that says DNR will give extension, it's about $1 million a year for water quality education. Some of that goes to Discovery Farms, some of it goes to support SNAP Plus, which is a software program used for nutrient management for managing manure on farms. And some of it goes to our program, the Natural Resource Education Program. They want to drop that by about, I think it's close to $300 million. It's $260 or $270 million a year. And in the line item right now, it says that that money will go to extension for water quality education. And we've also heard scuttlebutt that they want to take that extension word out of there. That DNR is going to make money available for water quality education, but it's not necessarily going to go to us. So, that's our program. And we're primarily educators and facilitators, and Glory's here. I work with a group that Glory's part of that's just got together to work on water quality in the whole Eau Claire watershed, which is about 2/3 of Eau Claire County, a bunch of Clark County, some Chippewa County. And I'm also the Red Cedar group. I facilitate that group up there too. And people are doing a lot of fantastic work despite what's being done in Madison. And Gloria asked the question about land conservation departments. We've done a lot of different surveys, sociological surveys in the Red Cedar. Some have been done over in the Wisconsin River Basin. Some have been done in the Eau Claire River Basin, all around the state. And the people that farmers trust most to help them with their natural resource issues and with their soil issues is usually the land conservation departments. They are usually number one on the list. Every county has a land conservation department. All of the counties that I work with are seeing budget cuts in that department. They're losing the ability to hire staff. They're losing the ability to do as much work as they used to do. So they are first on the list in terms of who farmers trust, and second on the list are the ag agents, the extension ag agents. And as Kathleen and Dana were talking, that became part of the education cut, the $250 million education cut. We heard representatives from around the state saying, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know I was voting to cut my own 4-H office. Well, congratulations, you just did. They weren't really paying attention to that stuff because extension is part of the university system. So we're in the midst of a complete reorganization around the state because we lost several $1 million in that reorg. So yeah, there's all kinds of natural resource stuff that I could go on and on, but I know you guys got other stuff to talk about.
We do have a couple of mentions I want to say of natural resources, and you may understand it better than I do. I've read through all the details and it's super confusing. But as near as I can tell, there are 43 additional positions being eliminated from the Department of Natural Resources. This is in addition to, there were 66 positions that were eliminated last year, including many scientists. And most of these positions are being eliminated, and as near as I can tell, the Division of Science Services is being completely eliminated. And I have a quote up here. I know it's hard to read. It kind of rambles on, but the upshot of it is what the governor said 2 years ago in the last budget when those positions were being eliminated. That yeah, we're going to do natural resources science, but we're only going to do it on an as needed basis, and we don't need those guys working for our state doing nonpartisan science research on natural resources. And
Okay, I was at the EPA listening session that happened here last November.
Wow.
Yeah, in November. And that was the most bipartisan group of people I have ever seen assembled for any political thing ever. There were farmers, landowners, rich, wealthy lake people, associations, people who have lots of cattle, people who don't have any cattle, people who live downstream, upstream. We have water everywhere here. And it is,
especially today.
Right now, it is a serious place where I felt like there's a lot of overlap here. Politically speaking, natural resources is a cornerstone of what we do in this state.
Absolutely.
It's who we are, and it is where we cross every political boundary that there is.
It's our heart. It's what we love about Wisconsin.
Right. So why are we doing this, and why aren't the Democrats screaming from the rooftops about, hey, this is your fish that you eat. This is your, this is where you fish and where you swim and where you go to the lake in the summertime. And this is all of that.
Oh my God, you're so right.
What
You said it in such a beautiful way. You are so right.
What is your name?
Erica.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Give her an applause.
Fight for.
Absolutely, I am so with you, and I can't wait to show you the last slide that I just made.
There's a theme in here.
There
What you said,
definitely.
and what we talked about earlier. For instance, I just 2 weeks ago circulated a bill on CWD.
The chronic wasting
Chronic
disease.
wasting disease.
That affects the deer.
What this bill does is I worked with the former DNR Secretary Meyer on this. I brought him in and we worked it out together. He's an expert on it. He brought other deer experts in, and my son's girlfriend's getting a PhD in biology, and her area of emphasis is human interaction and pollution. And so we circulated this bill. There are 397 deer farms in the state of Wisconsin. Okay, there are 600,000 deer hunters. We have, in support of our bill, we have Whitetails Unlimited. We have the Bow Hunters Association. We have every ecology type group is in favor of our bill, but there are 397 deer farmers that are against it. Not all of them are against it either, but there are some of them against it. I don't get one Republican to co-sponsor it because the deer farmers donate to them. So this is a prime example of what we were talking about. We're on the side of 600,000 people that would like to hunt, and that the entire resource is at risk. And so what are these folks doing? They cut the scientists out of the DNR. They're getting campaign contributions from these farms, and that stops good policy. I've been a deer hunter since I was 12 years old, and still hunt. But you're afraid to eat the meat. You don't know what you're getting anymore. And we know for sure that these deer farms were the point source of CWD. It came from these farms. So all we're trying to do is get more oversight over the fencing and regulatory oversight over these farms, and we can't get any Republicans to sign on.
And if you don't think there's any correlation between what they're doing to water and the corporations who sell bottled water, then I got water to sell you. Because there's always money behind these efforts and the ignorance behind polluting our water.
I want to talk for a minute about state parks. The governor cut all of the state funding support for state parks in the last budget. We did have a study that looked forward based on how much the state parks were raising in fees. The governor raised all the fees to use the state parks in the last budget. The study now came back and showed going forward there's roughly $1.5 million deficit every year going forward. Instead of giving back the money, the state money that the governor took, he's raising fees again this budget. So one of the things I did in the alternative budget was to, of course, pay for this and pay for the state employees' expense, etc. But what I also raised as a problem is that 2 budgets ago there was a provision to sell 10,000 acres of land by July 2017. And some of us have been watching very closely what happens in the very few, the end of June, the beginning of July, to see how they managed to do this.
Do you know how much?
I don't know how much they've sold so far. So here's the slide I wanted to show you. This morning when I woke up, I looked outside my living room window and I saw this. And it's not on your slideshow, it's not under your handout because I made this up before today. It's a mama and 2 twin baby deer. 2 little fawns, if you can see the little fawns are right, there's one little fawn there looking for her teat and the other little fawn is right by her head. And this is our flooded pasture, this is our farm. And this is kind of like our garden right outside our living room window. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly to go what you were saying, Eric. I mean, this is why we live in Wisconsin. This is, and I have the quote is in your handout, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Which is, I'm sure you've heard, it's a beautiful, beautiful way to talk about our environment. And why I'm a farmer, why am I an organic farmer? I mean, this is like so precious. It's so much, it captures why I do what I do, why I live the way I do.
First thing on CWD, but.
Well, it's why we gotta keep them healthy. Yep. So these are a few of the things that we talked about that I fixed in the alternative budget, and none of these ag and environmental problems are big money dollars. A lot of them are federally funded, as some of you know, so we're not really looking at a lot of state dollars. There's not a big trade-off here. It's like we talked about, it's more of a political decision. It's a decision about what we're going to spend money on. These last two charts are in your black and white handout, so you probably have a black and white handout. If you don't have a black and white handout, raise your hand, and we'll have Nathan and Bailey, our helpers at the back, get you the handout. It's basically a handout that shows you what we would do instead. These are the things that I talked about that we would not buy. There's a $325 million shift from the general fund to transportation. That's this big part. I don't think we should buy the state-run circus. I don't think we should buy the expansion that Chris talked about of public money for private schools statewide or special ed. I also took those dollars. I made a number of changes to Medicaid, including taking the federal dollars and changing some of those contracts to state employees. I took away the governor's Band-Aid and completely funded schools with the new formula. These are changes to income, property, and sales tax. I didn't mention this, but in the budget, the governor has a sales tax holiday. It is the first weekend of August in 2018. There's no sales tax that weekend if his budget proposal goes forward. It costs the state, all of us, it costs us $22 million for one holiday of a weekend with no sales tax. And then second of all, the governor's making a very modest change in the income tax. The average tax filer would save $44 when they file their tax. This costs over $200 million. So those two ideas I didn't think were really smart. And then I changed a number of tax credits and deductions, including the deduction for private school to come off of your income tax, and the ag and manufacturing tax credit. Why is corporate taxes dropping so fast? Because there was a very large loophole put into the budget in 2013 that now takes the corporate income tax for ag and manufacturing down to less than 0.5%, and it's roughly about 7%. It costs a huge amount of money, over $600 million in the budget. So that's that big jump right there. So that's stuff I would not buy. And then the next page is what I would buy.
You don't want a circus?
No, well, we got a circus, honey. It's
One of the things that we have to bear in mind is that with the bonding on transportation, we're going to spend, is it $422 million servicing debt?
a lot, yeah.
It's something, I mean, the debt service is
It's
becoming enormous.
easily to be more.
I may be wrong on that number, but it's
No,
like
I can tell you.
22% of the money going into transportation is going for debt service. And then, if we take a look at buildings, the vertical type buildings rather than horizontal, we spend $20 million a year servicing buildings, trying to keep repairing buildings that were long ago earmarked to be torn down and rebuilt. So just to keep things like Phillips from having all the water pouring through the roof, and other places, there's all over the state, we just keep patching and spending $20 million a year on that. It's just ridiculous.
So,
yeah.
But I just wanted to say one more thing from an environmental perspective. To me, this is a coming crisis that's not getting the attention that it should be getting in Wisconsin, and that's groundwater. We've got an issue. You've probably seen some stories about what's happening over in Kewaunee County, and that's kind of a canary in the coal mine for this, because Kewaunee County, that part of the state, has what's called karst geology, where you've got
hold on, sorry. You gotta start over.
You've basically got shallow distance to groundwater, and there's cracks in the bedrock close to the surface. So whatever soaks through the grass after about 6 or 10 inches goes right down into some cracks through the rocks and right down into the aquifers and right down into groundwater. So if you've got excess manure on land in someplace like Kewaunee County, and it rains, it's gonna wash that manure right down into the ground and right down into the groundwater. So basically, pretty much all of Kewaunee County, you can't drill a well anymore and get water that's drinkable. People are having basically manure coming out of their taps. And they're having to ship, Jeff was alluding to this, they're having to ship bottled water into Kewaunee County because there's no clean water coming out of the ground anymore. And I want you to think about that. This is Wisconsin. We've got 13,000 lakes, 10,000 over Minnesota, heck with them. We've got 13,000 here. There's water everywhere. And all of that water is connected. All of that groundwater is connected to the surface water is connected to the groundwater, it's all connected. If you look at DNR data, and for somebody from DNR to come to this meeting and talk, they would have had to like jump through probably 50 hoops and get 25 signatures on a piece of paper. So you're not hearing this a lot because there's not a lot of communication going on about some of this stuff. But if you look at the amount of nitrates in groundwater in people's wells, if it gets past 10 parts per million, the well is contaminated. You can't drink the well water, especially babies. You get blue baby syndrome, all that stuff, where babies can't oxygenate because of the nitrates in their blood. But if you look at nitrate data from surface water, from rivers and lakes, that is climbing as well. And the only reason that's happening is because of excess runoff from manure operations. There's nitrates on a natural level in Wisconsin are fairly low. There's not a lot of this that's supposed to be there. And all across the state, we're seeing nitrates increasing in groundwater and increasing in surface water. Now imagine, this is Wisconsin. This is God's country. You should be able to own a piece of property anywhere in Wisconsin and have the confidence that you can drill a hole in the ground and find water that's drinkable. That's not the case anymore, and it's getting to be less and less the case in many parts of the state. And if we don't get a handle on this, and what it's going to take is agricultural changes. Changes in how we manage ag, change in how we manage manure from large ag operations, and changes in terms of how farmers are great. They want to do things right. They want to take care of their land. They want to be good citizens. They want to produce food. They want their farm to be sustainable. But a lot of the things that we're doing, that we've been doing for decades, aren't lending themselves to sustainability and aren't lending themselves to clean water and soil conservation. We need to change that, and more we're getting our hands tied. We have great regulations in Wisconsin to do some of this stuff, but those regulations have a tag on that says you can only do it if there's cost share money available. And that cost share money is slowly disappearing and it's not available, and you have less and less staff in the land conservation departments to enforce those regulations and to help those farmers do that stuff. So from a basic existence perspective, all of this stuff about healthcare, all this stuff about transportation, it's all very, very important. If we don't have clean water to drink in the state of Wisconsin, none of this stuff matters.
That's right.
So, what's important to us? And when you bring this stuff up to some people in Madison, I can't understand if you put a list of what are the priorities? Clean water, healthy food, all these things that are priorities, they seem to be at the bottom of the list of the people that are in charge right now, and I don't understand that. And that, to me, it makes absolutely no sense. But
Thank you.
Since I've become very active in this area in the last 6 months or so, one of the best parts about that is that when you go to a town meeting or a county board meeting on this issue, people are lined up, overflowing the hall, and they are from either side of the political spectrum. This is such an important issue, and it crosses all political philosophies and boundaries. And people have come up to me, and they know who I am, and they know they voted against me and many times, and tell me and thank me for actually bringing awareness to this issue. And it is such an important issue, and it's so hard to believe that elected officials in Madison should be actually standing in those rooms and realizing what they're doing to people, and that they are actually doing it to the people who vote for them.
A lot of the money that I'm showing you, that I'm moving around in this slide and in the next slide, comes from what we call the general fund. But a lot of the solutions that we talk about related to water and the environment are not in the general fund. They're money that's already coming into the state, either money coming in through inspections or money coming in through federal dollars for enforcement. So to fix the problems in Department of Natural Resources does not take money away from these other things that we're talking about. They can be fixed with the possible exception of the tiny, tiny amount of money going to the state parks. You know, it's like less than $2 million. So to fix all these things, which I've done in the spreadsheet for my alternative budget, doesn't take money away from schools and healthcare and roads and local government. Yeah, Jackie.
Well, this is a little off of what you said there, right there about the cost, but I wanted to ask Dan, I guess, if he could explain how much does it take, for a farmer, to what point is this, the manure spread on these lands going to affect local people, such as, rather young, right there, who's in a group out at the Priory, who just went through this whole thing about they had a development that was going to come in and build houses on one acre lot.
Okay, maybe you could restate what Jackie was saying so people have
Yes.
to hear.
The proposal was for a development to come into 55 acres, and they proposed to have 31 housing units put there. It has exposed bedrock in places. Bob Cooper and Dr. Tinker gave us information that it's going to go straight down to the water that we all are using, the same aquifer. And they were proposing 1.1 acre per house. Now, if you do the math, you dig a hole and hope it's going to be good for your drinking water. You have septic system that the almighty mound will never fail, and it'll take care of all problems, which none of us believed. And then you have a house that's probably not a 3-bedroom bungalow. And then if a eager gopher or something goes through there, your mound has to be resited. You have 50-foot minimum between your drinking water and what comes out. Also, the nitrates are a consideration, all this. Thank God we were able to have the developer change his mind and put it at a barely acceptable, affordable price, and thank God the land got bought, and it's just 15 acres that are involved with 2 dwellings.
My question though was, what that land is going to be used for instead is going to be farming. And that my question was, to how much manure is going to be put there? Are you still going to have the problem because of, I don't know, I doubt that this farming is a calf hole.
I don't know
But-
what you're saying.
No.
That's not anything I've learned.
Not in that neighborhood.
It's not going to be there,
It's-
okay.
it'll be
That's what I was
left.
wondering, so now they're
No.
going to end up with the same problem from manure. No.
You'd have to be able to figure out how to farm on hills. That's all hilly out there.
It's rock.
It's rock.
Yeah.
It's fractured shale.
Okay.
It's my
Yeah,
own
that's-
neighborhood. So,
That's why I was afraid of putting manure on it though.
Yeah, there will be fertilizer if it's done that way, but it will be spread fertilizer. I'm sorry, it will be regular fertilizer. It won't be manure spread. There are not any livestock farms in the neighborhood, and there won't be.
It really doesn't matter because Cranberry Creek, I think, had listed about 1,000 acres in Eau Claire County that they were intending to spread manure on.
Where they rent
So
land, yeah.
you have no protection, basically. It's not like it's a CAFO that's coming into Eau Claire County. It's way over there in Dunn County, and to have 7,000 animals, they have to have thousands of acres of land.
Keep in mind
This
that
is
there is safe As done.
Sorry, I lost my zapper.
Okay. There are safe formulas for spreading. That's not really the issue. The issue, small farms can do it well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just when you have this increase to thousands of animals located in one concentrated area, and then the profit margin decreases the further away you get to have to spread, so they tend to overspread close to the farm because of the profit margin, and and without regard to the water and the neighbors surrounding them, which, by the way, this legislature and our Attorney General has said they cannot consider neighboring properties when they consider high-capacity wells and anything else that they do.
We are hearing that permit may not be approved.
Yeah,
I
we've
think-
been working on that.
Yeah, I know you are, and I appreciate everybody that has been working on it, and we are almost to the end, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes.
Just quickly regarding Cranberry Creek, since it came up, it was not approved by the DNR, and they were given a list of things they had to do if in fact they wanted to expand, and they did not meet the dated deadline. So, if
Which
they
was
want to
yesterday?
expand,
Thursday.
Thursday, okay. Yeah, thank you for all of your work. I just want to summarize a little bit, just to show you what's possible, and this is on your black and white sheet. So these are the things I would buy. I talked about the school aid formula. This is the piece right here, completely redoing the school aid formula, taking Tony Eber's plan to fix all the problems of the school aid formula. This is the repair of the UW, paying for free 2-year UW college for Wisconsin students and for Wisconsin residents, and a free tech college. So it's putting a lot of money into UW. It's also adding $100 million in need-based financial aid. But we didn't talk about broadband at all. I have to tell you, broadband is one of my biggest headaches. We have on our farm internet by Pony Express. I put, as did Governor Dayton in his budget, $100 million in for broadband. The governor has put a meager $11 million, and I don't know if you noticed, but the Senate couldn't even get that passed. And then putting local government has been starved. You folks who work with local government know that local government has been starved for a very, very long time. I added a great deal of money to that. At the mental health, I talked about the TED. We talked about the treatment alternatives and diversions. I have miscellaneous up there, but that includes the personal care workers, the nursing homes, and a number of other little changes. So all this to say, there are different choices, different priorities, using the same budget. And I really want to thank Jake, who did a lot of the number slides in this, and my staff and data staff, and there you can see how to reach us. And I would now say, I have a couple of slides at the end that are kind of the appendix, and if you have any questions about that, I'd be glad to talk about them, but we are yours, and we have the room for another 15 minutes. So, anybody that has something they want to say?
Thank you.
This will be tough for me to talk into this. I've been waiting patiently to share this, but I don't know if you can answer this, but I would like you to address it. It came up in both Dan and Jeff's comments where Dan, starting with Jeff, the guy said, "I didn't vote for you, but thank you." And then you made the comment that, "I didn't know I was voting for, but yet they vote for these things." So my concern is how the message, because everything that was said in this room really wasn't a surprise today to anybody in here, or most people in here. It seems like at every turn, Democrats are getting outmaneuvered in the message. And my concern, and it's been a concern for a while, is how the message of the Democrats is being perceived by the voting bloc, by the general public. And I don't know why it is, but people continue to vote against their best interests. And I can't understand that.
Can I take that just a minute? I spent a great deal of time trying to understand what happened in the 2016 election. I talked to county clerks and election judges, spent a lot of time with the numbers. I even spent an entire afternoon counting new voter registrations in the Trempealeau County Courthouse. And what I discovered is that in the west and the north, about 10% of the people who voted in 2016 were new voters. They went to the polls for the very first time and they likely voted for Trump. We know that the overall numbers across the state were down. So what that tells us is that people that tend to vote Democratic in a presidential year, a lot of them did not go to the polls. So much so that in this area, Hillary barely got above what you would get in what we call an off year or a gubernatorial year, when the president's not on the ballot. So what that says to me is that the Democrats don't need to change their message to become Trump-like. What they need to do is do a better job of appealing to the people who share their values. Why did I think about taking the idea of a lot of money? I moved $1 billion, the governor did not move, into universities, tech colleges, into education. Why? Because I think we can make the case that instead of having manufacturing corporations pay nothing in taxes, or even but more, give them money from the state, they're all complaining about not having enough workforce. Well, let's make it easy to get into the tech colleges. Let's make that fella sitting at home saying, you know, I'm 25, I don't want to go to college, but I really like to have a job doing X. But there's no way I'm going to make it to college. Let's make that barrier so easy that he thinks, oh my gosh, Democrats are not talking about something that means something to me. And that's a tiny answer. There's obviously a much bigger answer, and we've got to, as Democrats, work that through.
Can I add just a quick piece? To me, it goes back to the election of Scott Walker much earlier. And I'm an educator, and there were some comments in the Leader Telegram from educators that voted for Scott Walker and said, I didn't realize I was voting for this. So the message is not clear to people as to what they're voting for. And I think this goes back earlier.
To 2010.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, certainly that was the beginning of our problems.
Yes.
One of the things, as I think most of you know that I'm a trial lawyer, the other hat I wear in life. And I've tried a lot of cases in 31 years all over the northern Wisconsin. And there are a couple of things that play here. Number one, we never go to trial on a case these days, in the last 5 years, without focus grouping it. Now, when we focus group it, we get, sample juries from surrounding counties, never the county where the trial is. And we go through the trial time and time and time again. We finished a case recently where we had done 19 focus groups to get ready for a trial. And the reason we do that, we're not changing the facts of the case. We're changing the way we message the case. And we are I'm involved in a project that is bringing that kind of analysis to the political thing. Because what Democrats have historically done is they lecture people. And people are sick and tired of being lectured to. People want to be listened to, particularly in the northwestern and northeastern side of the state. They want to be listened to. And the most important thing about a focus group is that we close our pie holes and we listen to what the people in the sample jury say about the presentation. It's so important to listen to people. And that's something that we often get in a situation where Madison is lecturing. And people resent that very much. Yeah.
Mike McCabe, Jeff, where are you?
Right here.
His book, Blue Jeans in High Places, that's the book you need to read, as he talks about all of the issues with Democratic messaging and all of the situations that have come about with Scott Walker where rural counties, and he uses Clark County where he's from as an example, about how Democratic messaging has failed there, and it has become this thing, huge turnaround in the last, 20, 30 years from being a county that sent Democrats in the state legislature to now being very Republican. And so I think it's about, and I'm only a certain ways into it, but it's the thing that struck me is that Democrats used to stand for something. We used to stand for something that meant something to everybody. It was universal. It meant something to the person who lived in the country, and it meant something to the person who lived in the city, and it was Medicare, and it was Social Security, and it was all of these, you know, these big environmental causes, and somehow that message is getting lost now. And it's not, I think rural people think that Democrats only represent folks in the city. I mean, look at the election map from this past year. That's what rural folks think. They think we just fight for folks in the city and we don't fight for them anymore. And I think we have to.
And that's why we need to message differently, because
Yes.
the people who are deer hunters need to know that we're the ones that are out making sure that the woods and the natural environment, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to bring that
Democratic Party
message.
doing that? Are we doing that?
Well, I just
Well,
did
we're
a.
Democrats, we're talking about it.
Are we doing it?
Yeah, I mean, we just launched a bill on CWD that the Republicans are fighting against because they represent the farms that started the CWD. And we represent the 600,000 deer hunters, which I'm one and Kathleen's one. So we're two, I guess.
I'm growing my own.
Um,
But let me take this back to the back. I'm sorry, we have all kinds of people and we have 10 minutes left, so.
I just wanted to say
Be
that
focused.
you're
Hey, hey,
pleasing-
hey, hey, hold on.
One of the interesting, enlightening things you said today, there were many, but
Can
one
you
of them
speak up
was,
just a little?
one of the enlightening things that you said today, you were talking about the school formula. And so Governor Walker right now is talking about giving money to the rural schools. And the rural schools, as I understand it, that's the center of the community. It's what holds a community together. And when they're threatened, that's the threatening of a lifestyle. So he's going to give money to the rural schools, but what you pointed out, this is not the formula that's being changed. These are some dollars that are going to be sent, I would say, for political purposes, and that's it. It doesn't change what's happening.
And if I could add just a little amendment to that, the Whitefish Bay is gonna get the same amount per student as little tiny Pepin.
You had it right the first time.
How about them Packers?
Yes,
I have a quick, easy idea.
good, good.
When you refer to non-public schools getting funding, pronounce it a little wrong and call it vulture.
That's very clever. Very clever. We got a lot of them.
But it gives vulture birds a bad rap.
And
It does.
Dana, can you please talk about the bill to make the
That's exactly
private
what I,
school voucher piece transparent to taxpayers?
that's what I was just,
All right,
I was
that's
just
good.
gonna,
Thank you.
Chris came up with this idea. And when people have ideas, contact us. You know, our offices work very hard at putting ideas together. And I was sitting next to Chris at a luncheon, was it Governor Walker or was it?
The chamber
It
rally
was
day at the
Miss-
Capitol,
uh,
the Oakland Chamber, Triple Valley Chamber.
At the Capitol,
Yeah,
and
at
it
the
was the
Capitol.
Lieutenant Governor was speaking. And she sits next to me and she says, why don't we have it mandatory that on tax bills, there'll be a designation of how much money is going to vulture schools, as you say. And we put that bill out, it's been circulated, and we don't get any Republicans on it. But that's a really good idea, because it's fair and open and obvious disclosure. What is it really costing you to have this private school system that's paralleling them? This was her idea.
Otherwise, we get attributed for it,
Well,
even though we have to levy for that money.
not only that, but small
You're on my list.
small districts don't think that they have to worry because there's not a private school right there in their town. But if they see it on their
Yes.
tax bill, they'll
They'll
realize
realize.
that they are
Absolutely.
paying
That's
for
an
it.
idea that came from Chris. And so, I mean, if people come up with ideas, call us, either one of our offices.
Absolutely, and you got all of our contact
All I could
information.
think of was that little guy carrying around the paper becoming a bill, and I went, oh,
It's so cool.
thanks to
Yeah,
Dana,
it's-
Robinson.
Yes, so we got,
Better quickly go through.
yeah. Go for it. I'm just thinking we got 5 minutes, so if you want to say something, get in line.
So it is important to listen to people, but I
Yes.
think you folks need to teach people as well. And we're up against what's
Bring it
called,
out just a little. There
we're
you
up
go.
against what's called neoliberalism, okay? And you don't have to use that word because it's a pretty simple concept. It's free market capitalism with no regulation. Free market capitalism doesn't like liberal education, liberal schools, public schools. free market liberalism that doesn't look at environment or business regulations. That's what we're up against on the state level and the federal level. It's not difficult. It's a short message. I only talk for a minute. And that's what we need to message, because that's what we're up against.
And we're up against even worse than that, because this trickle-down economics routine that we've heard, there's never been a single economic study in the history of the world that shows that it works. It doesn't work. It's the opposite of what's good for a vibrant economy.
Yep, I'm coming. Got time on my list.
One real quick thing though, is all of the messaging today has been very, very helpful. And one of the reasons it's been very helpful is it was visual. We could all see it and understand, following the graphs, what was what. To your point of we haven't been very good messaging things, part of that is because we don't have consistent and visual messaging. We've got smart individuals in this area and across the state who would get it if we had clear, consistent messages that hit the populace that matters. So that would be my plea to you is, how can we help? What resources do we need? Let's get together, have some consistent messaging, and change or open the door to minds that can matter.
I have had a lot of people around me do what they call listening sessions, where they sit and they listen. But I feel like we need to have conversations, not just one person listening, one person talking. And the reason I put this handout together is because I am a very visual person. And I have a difficult time with the budget book. You saw this book. This is the Cliff Note version of the budget. No, everything in here that's red is bad, and I'm trying to change it. Everything I'm working on figuring out what it does. Everything green is money I'm stealing for fixing the stuff that's red. But so it's visual. That's me. That's totally me.
We need to do more of it.
Right. So this is why I left you the handout to take home. We have extras at the back if you know somebody that wants this or could benefit from it. If you want to keep it and show it to your brother-in-law, please take it, use it. And then Erica.
I'm going to add one thing with the messaging thing.
All right.
That's all. And I did not, I was not one of the people that voted for Bernie Sanders in the general election and didn't vote for Hillary, but I did vote for him in the primary election. And I think one of the reasons why I did that as a Democrat was not because I didn't believe in Hillary, but I drank the Kool-Aid of sorts of his very consistent messaging. It was loud, it spoke to everybody, and it was consistent all the time. He said the same things over and over and over again, and it took him 15 minutes to say it. And I think that that is something that Democrats, that fiery, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do it together, we gotta figure out how to narrow it down and make it has to fit on Twitter now. I mean, I hate to say it, I'm probably the youngest person in this room, you know, I'm just gonna say that we have to shorten it, fire it.
Thank you.
I think the other part of that issue of folks showing up and voting Democratic is voter suppression. I'm very concerned about that in this state. So what are we doing to ensure access to the ballot and to work against these voter suppression efforts?
There is one little detail that I forgot to put up on the PowerPoint, but I did put $100,000 to do a study to redraw the districts so they're totally nonpartisan and require the legislature to do that. And that wasn't my idea. This is a Democratic budget amendment that we're all working on. So we're a group here working to try and get it done. And I totally agree with you, and Dana wants to say something.
I'm sure you're aware, we have been working on a lawsuit for several years, and now it is going to the Supreme Court. We are very...
The state or
the
U.S.
U.S. Supreme Court will hear it probably in September or October. We're very optimistic that the districts will have to be redefined and realigned before the next election. And that's really important because, you know, in 2010, we beat the Republicans by, geez, I can't remember, was it 117,000 votes?
Yeah.
Something like that. But we only had 36 seats in the assembly. You know, they've drafted these lines in a way that it's almost impossible. It is impossible for us to win.
So what do you believe the remedy would be should you win
Well,
at the High
the
Court?
court has said that we each side is to submit proposals. But what's going to functionally happen, I believe, is that the court will redraw it. The three-judge federal court will redraft it. Because I think there'll be an impasse, we'll never get it done.
Will the court do it?
Oh, they have done it in the past.
So the Supreme Court could say the court.
The Supreme Court won't do it, but the Supreme Court will send it back to the district court. There's a three-district panel set of judges, and they've already ruled in our favor. And so they're gonna, I suspect that's how this will happen. And it's the biggest decision that the United States Supreme Court will have seen in 20 or 30 years. This is a huge decision, and it really means a difference between having a republic and not having a republic. Because the Democrats have done this to the Republicans in Massachusetts and some other states. It isn't fair. You know, they've done it to us here in most states, they've done it to us. But the question is, do we really want to have a republic, or do we want to be like Russia? That's really what's going on here. Because the other thing is, Citizens United has opened floodgates of money. When we talk about visual, we're outspent 8, 9, 10 to 1. The Democrats just don't have the money that the Republicans have. And so that's going to have to be addressed at some point.
Now, there's two things going at the same time, though, and don't confuse them. One is the Supreme Court case, which addresses the current maps. And then there's the AB 44, SB 13, which would actually change the law for the next redistricting, which would be after the 2020. So there's two parallel things, and you got to be sure there's both of those things you have to be aware of. And then we have, just throwing a little advertisement here, we got June 1st in Menominee, a town hall and forum on this subject. And June 22nd, we're going to be doing it right here in this room in Eau Claire, the same thing.
Okay, just a few more minutes, go ahead. And
My question response was, so by the next election, we will not have the redistricting completed.
No, I think by this coming election, if the Supreme Court weighs in the way we believe it will, we will have new lines.
Well, they've been ordered to draw ones by
by November of this year, the court has already ordered that new lines be drafted.
Okay.
Just to get back to messaging really quick, one reason why I don't think people know what Democrats stand for is that Democrats don't talk about what they stand for. When I think about like the most memorable sound bites of like Burke's campaign, Barrett's campaign, they were all talking about how Walker was so bad, and they never spent any time talking about like the things that they actually stood for, you know, like the actual like education, healthcare, stuff like that. And like Hillary did the same thing. Like when I think about the most memorable sound bites of Hillary's campaign, it was always how evil Trump was. Like his temperament. Exactly. And I think that one thing that Democrats need to do going forward is to stop talking about Republicans and to start talking about like what they actually stand for.
And I would throw in Democratic voters in there as well. Democratic voters got to quit talking about Walker. You got to start talking about your values.
Republicans are getting good at digging their own holes.
Well, thank you. I
Go
really
get your hopes up,
appreciate
though,
it.
Dan.
I really appreciate everybody. And I want to thank all the people that helped make today possible, and Dave's office, and Community Television, and Steve, and Mary Lee, and Nathan, who helped me set up. Thank you to all of you.